class. Remember, the purpose is to reward the faithful, fulfill the Lord's Prayer. Remember the Lord's Prayer? Redeem creation, and take away, undo all the curses that were set. So the curse against the serpent, the animals, curse against Satan. Remember now he's going to be put away for 1,000 years. Curse against the woman, curse against man. Remember against having crops and working. Curse against the earth. The crops are going to grow. So all those things are going to change during the millennial kingdom. And we have fulfilling of God's covenants, the Abrahamic covenant. There's covenants that God has set. He has not forgotten his covenants. He will fulfill his covenants, and that's one of the main purposes of the millennial kingdom is to fulfill those covenants. And so we have the Abrahamic covenant, where God promised that Israel will be a great nation. Israel is actually a really small nation right now. And then God promised that Israel would inherit the promised land. They're fighting over the promised land as we speak. But in the millennial kingdom, they will have that. They will have all that has been promised to them. The Davidic covenant, God promised that David would come and become an everlasting kingdom. God promised that David would come on an eternal, everlasting throne. And God promised that from David would come an everlasting king. And so Christ will reign during the millennial kingdom, and Christ is from the seed of David. We're also going to see that David will also be reigning. That's kind of fascinating as well. The new covenant, God will forgive Israel's sins. God will forgive Israel's sins. And God will give Israel a new heart, and God will use Israel to reach Gentiles. So all these are going to fulfill those covenants. Fulfill biblical prophecy. Lately, we've spent 6+ years talking about the end times. There's a lot of prophecy to talk about, and still more to come. So all this will be fulfilled. Also, to prove a point that mankind will fail without God's grace. Remember, Satan has been put away for 1,000 years. In other words, the devil's not there to tempt you. So why will people be sinning? In other words, those who are born into the millennial kingdom, will have a choice to accept or reject Christ. And many, unfortunately, will reject Christ. But that's not because Satan was there tempting them. So this proves the point that mankind will fail regardless without God's grace. And of course, this is a meaningful culmination of world history. If you research history, there has to be purpose. History is driving towards some sort of end. Well, this is what it is. And then it is best to view the teaching of Jesus in the light of the millennial kingdom. When Jesus is teaching, you got to refer to the past because he's teaching the Jewish people, and that's their context, right? And he's also pointing to the future. So what is he talking about? The kingdom. So if you understand those 2 points, you can better understand what Christ is teaching. So that catches us up to speed. So we're going to move on. At this moment, we're going to go back to Ezekiel's vision of the Millennial Temple. Remember, we spent several weeks looking at the details of the Millennial Temple, all the intricacies, all the buildings, all the measurements. Now we're going to go back to it because it's missing something. When you can have a house that's built, but doesn't become a home until you reside in it. This is the Lord's house. Well, now we're going to see him reside in it. So on this day, Ezekiel saw the glory of God fill the temple. The temple is built, and now it is necessary to signify that the building was accepted by God. The house does not become a home until the owner moves in. Only the presence of God can make the building the house of God. So I'm using this as the start of our 1,000-year clock for a millennial reign. Because now the Lord is now dwelling among us. All right, so number 1, Ezekiel 43, if you go to Ezekiel 43 verse 1. Afterward he brought me to the gate, even the gate that looketh toward the east, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel, came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. Remember, Ezekiel is getting a tour. He's going throughout all the tour of the temple, and now he's brought back to the outside to the east gate. So this is where Ezekiel is with Christ, who's his tour guide, and what does he see coming? He sees the glory of God of Israel coming from the way of the east. So coming from the east, coming toward the eastern gate where Ezekiel and the Lord are. So we have him coming from the east. Verse 2, and behold, the glory of God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like the noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. What an awesome sight, an awesome noise coming in. Amazing when the glory of the Lord comes in, what that will be like. And so we find here a description, Ezekiel's describing his voice, and what does his voice sound like? Rushing water, rushing water. My uncle lived along the Hudson River in upstate New York. And you'd sleep at night, and it was just the most beautiful sound of the river going down, the water going down the river at night. It was, just fantastic. And I think this is going to be much louder, rushing river. This is more of a gentle background of a river, but rushing river coming toward the sound of the rushing waters. So this shows God's power and majesty. Power and majesty. Psalm 29:3. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters, and the glory of God thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. Psalm 93:4. The Lord is on high. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. When you're if you go to the beach, you're staying overnight. That sound of the crashing waves. It's awesome. Revelation, and then if you happen to be there during a hurricane or a storm out in the ocean, it's even more amazing. Revelation 1:15, and his feet like unto fine brass as they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Ezekiel's hearing the same as John's hearing, right? The Bible's consistent, right? It doesn't change. Revelation 14:2, and I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, and I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. Revelation 19:6, and I heard as it were the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Hallelujah! For the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. The voice of rushing water, and the earth shined with his glory. What an awesome day that will be. Awesome day. Verse 3, and it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Shabar, and I fell upon my face. What is Ezekiel talking about there? He's remembering a previous vision. So you need to go back to Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel chapter 10, 8, 9, and 10 to find out what he's talking about. Now, clearly we'll touch base on this, but he's remembering a previous vision. What he's seeing here is similar to what he saw actually a year or 2 months earlier. A vision he had a year or 2 months earlier. And that vision he had a year or 2 months earlier was God leaving the temple. God leaving Solomon's temple. God leaving the first temple. Ezekiel 10:19 says, and the cherubims lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels also were beside them, and everyone stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house. And the glory of the Lord of Israel was over them, above them. The glory of the Lord left the temple above the east gate and went eastward. Went eastward. We're gonna talk about that. Because God leaves the temple in stages at different points. We'll get to that a bit later. But this is what Ezekiel is remembering. This reminds him of a previous vision of the Lord, of God leaving the temple. Now he's seeing God return the same way back to the temple. If you remember, we talked about Ezekiel. Ezekiel's bookends is God leaving the temple and God returning to the Millennial temple. And this is basically encompasses the book of Ezekiel. The Lord has left, the Lord has promised to return. And so that encouraged Ezekiel, who himself was raised to be a priest, and he could not because he was in captivity. So since Ezekiel is remembering the past, let's do that ourselves. So let's review the history of God's glory filling the earthly structures of the tabernacle and the temple and the leaving of the temple. So this is kind of an interesting study in itself. The Shekinah. You've heard the term Shekinah glory. Shekinah, we use that term. What do we use that term for? Anytime the Lord's dwelling, there's this kind of glory, right? The cloud, the fire, there's a kind of glory. Oh, thank you.
I didn't know how to spell
Thank you. Thank you. So the Hebrew word, Shekinah, which means the dwelling, and it's a term used to describe God's visitation of the presence or dwelling of God on the earth. God's visitation of the presence or dwelling of God on the earth. The term Shekinah does not occur in the Bible at all. It's a term that Hebrew scholars came up apparently later in time to describe God because they didn't want to use the name of God. This is God's presence, but they didn't want to use the name of God, so they just called it the dwelling. The Lord's abiding with us, the dwelling. God is here. So they came up with they just came up with this other term, Shekinah. So they wouldn't have to be using the name of God. They're very cautious, so they don't want to even defile the name, so they even say the name, right? So this is where they use the term Shekinah, and that comes in some other Jewish rabbinical sources. So the first time we see the Shekinah glory coming to the nation among the Israelites, and we could talk about Shekinah talking to individuals like the burning bush, things like that, but it's Exodus chapter 13, verse 20, where God led the Israelites to the wilderness with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Remember that? Ezekiel 13:20. And they took their journey from Succoth and encamped at Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. This is God himself leading his people, leading the nation of Israel. They journeyed, the verses, and they took their journey from Succoth. Succoth would have been the first stop after they left Egypt. They left Egypt, first night of camping, the Lord chose to leave them the rest of the night. Now, the Shekinah, or the cloud by day and fire by night, that wasn't something that only the Israelites saw. It's not like, oh, I only see that, nobody else can see it. The Egyptians saw it. Right? Do you remember that? The Egyptians pursued the Israelites. And remember, we got to have these guys back. We're going to be able to survive. Our economy won't be able to survive without them. We need them as our workers and our slaves, and we need to go get them back. Why do we let them go? So they pursue them. And remember, they came all the way to the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were coming and confronting the Israelites, and the Red Sea was on one side, and the Egyptians were approaching on the other side. What did the pillar of fire do at that point in time? Came in between the Egyptians and the Israelites. The Egyptians saw it. There was no hope of seeing it. Exodus 14:24. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, and they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. Isn't that awesome? They're seeing it firsthand. The Lord fights for them. The Lord fights for them. I pray that if someone comes against any one of us, they see the Lord fighting for us. Lord, open their eyes and see the angels around us and the Lord fighting for us so they can flee. So that's our first occurrence where the Shekinah is leading and dwelling among the Israelite nation. Next we have God descended upon Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:17. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because God descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice, and the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain. The Lord called Moses up to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. So this is when Moses receives from God the Ten Commandments and the law. He doesn't receive the tablets at this moment. There's going to be 3 trips. This is the first of 3. He brings down the law and recites it to the people when he comes off the mountain. At this moment, the people agree to what is said, kind of like a legal document. Let's have a little negotiation here. This is what I propose. right? And now Moses is then going to go up and going to get the written form and codify it, I guess you could say. You know, you go to McDonald's, you see presented in front of you, as Pastor mentioned, value meal 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Well, that's presenting to you what your offer is, and then when you tell the cashier, or now the kiosk, what you want, then you've made that transaction. You codified, this is what I want, and you put your credit card in. We were at, with the team, the golf team, at McDonald's, and an elderly couple, kiosk in front of them, we don't know what to do. And there's no, with the restaurant swamp, there's no customer help whatsoever. So one of the dads that were with us saw the issue and went up and took care of it. And said, what do you want? And even for us, like, this menu, the questions seem to be strange. But anyway, that's a sidebar, right? So everything is going to the kiosk. And trying to figure out how you want to get what you want. But Moses has returned from the mount. God is on the mount. Fire, quaking, smoke, all of that. His Shekinah glory is there. His Shekinah is there. He's dwelling on the mount. Exodus 24:15. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went in the midst of the cloud and got him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So this is when the Lord is codifying, writing on the tablets of stone, and so he's there 40 days and 40 nights. Notice here the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on top of the mount. So Moses comes down from the mount. What happens? Worshiping the golden calf. Actually, who's the only person in history to break all 10 commandments at one time? Moses. So the tablets were dropped and broken, and then you have the whole issue with the golden calf. And then a little bit later, a month later, he goes back up to the mountain to get a new set. So Exodus 34:5, and the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. So that's 3 different times that Moses goes up into Mount Sinai. The Lord's dwelling on top of the mountain. Another occurrence, and this occurrence actually takes place between right after the golden calf. So this is before the second tablets are set. But this occurrence here is God descended in a cloud to speak to Moses in the meeting tent. The meeting tent. The tabernacle is not built yet, but at this point in time they do have instructions to build the tabernacle, but this is not the tabernacle. Tabernacle, what does tabernacle mean? Tent. Right, so when you read this, when you read Exodus 33:7, which we'll read, you're going to say, Peter, it says tabernacle. Yes, it does, because it means tent. Exodus 33:7 says, and Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. So the tent of the congregation, the meeting, place of meeting. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out of the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. So Moses set up a temporary meeting tent. This is not the tabernacle, wasn't built yet. But we find here he sets up this meeting tent outside the camp, in fact, afar off from the camp. Why would that be? God's glory.
Probably kill them all.
Kill them all. What just happened? Oh, they had the golden calf, right? So when you sin against the Lord, what occurs? Separation. Right, separation. So this is where there's separation. I think through this study, you're going to find we have a holy, holy God, and He wants everything holy. And so He's separating Himself from that defilement.
When He opened the ground up, right?
Yes, He did punish. Right. There's several different occurrences where defilement occurred, and there was great punishment. So this is the meeting tent. And Exodus 33:8, verse 8, says, and it came to pass when Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. Remember, the tent is afar off, and they're in their own tents, right? And it came to pass as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. So here's a little graphic here. Moses sets up a tent, the Lord comes down. I'm sure it wasn't this nice little puppy, fun, cartoonish thing. It was probably more majestic and awesome and fearful. Yes.
Probably encapsulated the whole thing instead of
Right.
a small little campfire there.
But we find here that the Lord comes down to meet with Moses. And the Lord talked with Moses. Verse 10, and all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he returned again into the camp, but his servant Joshua the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. He comes and talks as a friend. Isn't that awesome? Notice he just spent this time, 2 different occasions on the Mount Sinai, 40 days, this past previous time. That becomes friendly, don't you think? Comes down and meets with Moses as a friend.
That says in the New Testament that he calls us his friend.
Yes, yes.
Well,
Spend more time.
actually, he said, if you do what I say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's important.
That's important, that's right.
Mhm.
Right, the more time you spend with him, the more friend you're going to be. If you're not spending time with him, you're probably not doing something you should be doing. That's what I told the boys that were at the price at the door. They're going to event that there's some sort of youth program to keep away from drugs and things like that. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. Spend time in here. So we shall see. The Lord has them, right? Verse 12, and Moses said unto the Lord, see, thou sayest unto me, bring up this people, that thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight. And consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And he said unto him, if thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. And for wherein shall I be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. Tell me about this conversation. What happened with this conversation?
Moses didn't want to lead them because they were rebellious. And he said, God, those are your people.
Make sure, Lord, these are your people. Make sure right? These are your people.
A lot of grace in that conversation, too.
There is. There is a lot of grace. Therefore I pray that I have found grace in thy sight. Show me now thy way, that I may know thee, and I might find grace in thy sight. Consider this nation as thy people. These are your people, Lord. You said these are your people. So Moses is asking, so the Lord responds, my presence shall go with thee. I will be with you. I will go with you. I will lead you. I will give you rest. You don't have to worry, Moses. I'll be there. I'll be leading. Remember, at this moment, the golden calf situation, there's a separation with the nation. And Moses is the leader. He's like, I don't want to lead these people without you. These are your people, Lord.
That's right.
I can't remember the time frame. Was this before or after God said, hey Moses, we'll get rid of these people and we'll start again with you? Was this before or after?
This is after.
Okay, so he's kind of reiterating God.
Yes.
Your people.
Yes. Yes. Yes, Moses is an incredible negotiator with God. Lord, do you want your glory to be downtrodden? Your presence? You made a promise. What are people going to think if you don't keep your promise? So Moses was incredible. That story and this story here. So here the Lord responds, my presence shall go with you. Don't worry, I'm going with you. I have not. And then Moses reiterates, if you're not going to come with us, we don't even want to go anywhere. We're not going to go anywhere without you, Lord. And if you don't come with us, what are people going to think? What are the nations of the world going to think? And so the Lord responded, I will do this thing also thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. Isn't it awesome the Lord knows us by name? By name, that's amazing.
Really?
Verse 18, and he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. So Moses has another request. Show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And he said, thou canst not see my face, for shall no man see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. Moses makes an incredible request. Lord, let me see all of you. Let me see all of you. Do we have that same request? Are we bold enough to ask for that ourselves? I don't know.
I'll just wait till we get to heaven.
We'll see him face to face, yeah.
See him as he
Clearly,
is.
if you're seeing him in all his glory, you are in heaven.
That's true. That's true.
But here, God granted his request as much as he can handle, covered Moses' face till he walked by, and then saw the last glimpse of his shadow behind him, right? So the Shekinah, this dwelling, is too powerful for us to even see. So Moses got closest to God's glory, and still God had to shield it from him. All right, the glory, we get to the tabernacle. The glory fills the tabernacle. You know, God promised that he would dwell in the tabernacle, Exodus 29:42. This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, before the Lord, where I will meet with you to speak there unto thee. And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. Notice the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. And I will sanctify the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, and I will sanctify also both Aaron and his sons to minister to me in the priest's office. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will be their God. I will dwell among the nation. I will dwell among Israel. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, that brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, and I will dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. This is a promise that God said to Moses, this is what I'm going to do. Here's the instructions for the tabernacle. This is where I dwell. Okay, we get to Exodus 40, and this is where the tabernacle is set up. Exodus 40, you can read all the instructions of the tabernacle, and then you can see all the how they set it up. Exodus 40, verse 17, and it came to pass in the first month in the second year of the first day of the month that the tabernacle was reared up. This is technically 15 days shy of 1 year since leaving Egypt. That followed, because remember they left on Passover, which is the 15th day of the first month. This is the first day of the first month of the second year. So they've already less than a year, just shy of a year. And Moses reared up the tabernacle, and fastened its sockets, and set up the boards thereof, and put in the bars thereof, and reared up its pillars. And he spread abroad the tent over the tabernacle, and put the covering of the tent above it. That's a fascinating study in itself. If you want to see the first wordless book, look to the coverings of the tent, of the tabernacle. It's the wordless book. As the Lord God commanded Moses, verse 20, and he took and put the testimony into the ark, and set the staves of the ark, and put the mercy seat above the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle, and set up the veil of the covering, and the covering of the ark of the testimony, as the Lord commanded Moses. So here we have the tabernacle is built. Let's progress forward to verse 33. And he reared up the court round about the tabernacle and the altar, and set up the hanging of the court gate. So Moses finished the work. We're glad we skipped through some time here, some of those details. Moses finished the work. Verse 34, and then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter into the tent of the congregation, because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in all their journeys. But in the cloud were not taken up Then it journeyed not till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night, in the sight of all the houses of Israel throughout all their journeys. So the tabernacle was finally set up by Moses, and the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. And so by day there was a cloud, and by night there was a pillar of fire. The Israelites would move when the pillar of fire or the cloud would move off the tabernacle and start heading down the path to the promised land. So this is the Lord dwelling among them. This is the Lord leading them personally, right? The Shekinah dwelling. Questions so far? All right, so when did the glory leave the tabernacle?
Across the River Jordan, isn't it?
No, the Lord's dwelling. You're going to talk about going to the promised land. The Lord's still dwelling in the tabernacle, still leading. We've got to go all the way to after the Israelites entered the promised land. The tabernacle was permanently placed at what location? The first capital of Israel, which was, anybody? Shiloh. Shiloh. So Shiloh, the tabernacle was in Shiloh for the next 300 years, plus. The whole time of the period of the Judges. And then under Eli, remember the high priest Eli? At this time he's old. The Philistines attack the Israelites. The Israelites decide to take the Ark of the Covenant out of the tabernacle and use it as a good luck charm. And they took the Ark of the Covenant to the front lines. And that didn't quite work out. Anybody know what happened next? Philistines took it, right? Philistines took it. The Ark of the Covenant is the mercy seat, the top of the Ark of the Covenant. That's where the Lord resides. That's his footstool. This is where the Lord resides. The Ark of the Covenant is taken out of the tabernacle. And now it's in Philistines' hands. 1 Samuel 4:10 says, "And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain." Jumping to verse 15. "Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were dim, that he could not see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, What is there done, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and the two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. And it came to pass, when he had mentioned of the ark of God, that he fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck brake. And he died, for he was an old man and heavy." I guess he should have not been eating so much. And he had judged Israel for 40 years. And his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child near to be delivered, and when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the woman that stood by her said unto her, Fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. God allowed the Philistines to take the ark of the covenant, and the glory of God was removed. Almost done, guys. This is reiterated again in Psalm 78, verse 58. "For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images." This is at the end of Judges. And if you're familiar with the Judges, it gets progressively worse in sin and debauchery as you go through Judges. Horrible. And there's some chapters you don't even read because it's so horrible. Now you're going to want to read it, right? "For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images." Verse 59. "When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. The glory of the Lord left. He used the Philistines as a tool to take the glory away. So the glory has left the tabernacle. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about the temple, Solomon's temple. We'll talk about the glory of the Lord coming into the temple. We'll talk about the glory of the Lord leaving the temple. And then we'll talk about the glory of the Lord entering into the Millennial temple. So just the fascinating study of God dwelling among the nation of Israel. Questions? Let's close in prayer. Dear Father, we thank you today. We thank you for your blessings. We thank you for your word. Lord, it just sends shivers up my spine when we talk about it and see your word come to life, Lord. And Lord, you are a holy God. And Lord, may we strive to seek you in all things, Lord. Lord, may we strive to live holy, Lord, that represents you. Lord, may we be a blessing to others. Lord, others come to know you through them seeing us and you seeing you and us. So.